Fire, 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 fire. Now you've heard it. Not shouted in a crowded theatre, admittedly, as I realize I seem now to have shouted it in the Hogwarts dining room. But the point is made. Everyone knows the fatuous verdict of the greatly overpraised Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, who asked for an actual example of when it would be proper to limit speech or define it as an action, gave that of shouting fire in a crowded theatre. It's very often forgotten what he was doing in that case was sending to prison a group of Yiddish-speaking socialists whose literature was printed in a language most Americans couldn't read, opposing President Wilson's participation in the First World War and the dragging of the United States into this sanguinary conflict, which the Yiddish-speaking socialists had fled from Russia to escape. In fact, it could be just as plausibly argued that the Yiddish-speaking socialists who were jailed by the excellent and overpraised Judge Oliver Wendell Holmes were the real firefighters, were the ones who were shouting fire when there really was fire in a very crowded theatre indeed. And who is to decide? Well, keep that question, if you would, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I hope I may say comrades and friends, before your minds.
And sisters, I hope I may say, comrades and friends, in particular our producer Jake Appett and our excellent graphic designer J. Andrew World, and Kelly is off tonight. She's not feeling well, but the voice you just heard, of course, was the late Christopher Hitchens. Mandatory plug, subject to this book, which is out at the end of December. And I found that intro really striking for a couple of reasons. So this is the beginning. He's in Canada. He's at a debate at a university that apparently looks like Hogwarts on free speech absolutism, and it's a mixture, right? I mean, part of the reason I wanted to write about him is that, like, I have very mixed feelings about the guy that I wanted to work out, since at his best, he's very, very good. I mean, he's an amazing writer and speaker, and when he's right, there's nobody that you'd rather have making the case, which makes him equally infuriating when he's wrong. And, and if obviously the last 10 years of his life, he went to some political places that I find pretty indefensible. But you see both even in that video if you watch the whole video, because there's some there's some sketchy arguments later on, and there's there's this Islamophobic stuff at the end about when he's sort of ranking threats to these things, but that was great, and it made me think about what he might think about the CRT wars. The culture wars going on right now, and the more substantive policy wars about people allegedly teaching critical race theory in K-12 classrooms, and when he says at the end of that clip, who gets to decide, right? Who what counts as the fire and who are the firefighters? Right? When you say, oh, people shouldn't be free to shout fire, it's like, okay, well, but I mean, what actually is a fire, right? What's worth getting alarmed about it? Who gets to decide? I think these are exactly the questions that are relevant to the crusade being waged by people like Chris Rufo, and the subject, the main subject of our episode tonight, James Lindsay, better known to Twitter users as @ConceptualJames, but also known to many people in state legislatures around the country as the guy who goes around giving testimony to them to push these laws against CRT. And according to the Rufos and Lindsays of the world, who should get to decide what goes on in, say, a high school history classroom is not, teachers, like history teachers themselves, but state bureaucrats with no, particular training in this, who would be enforcing vaguely written laws against teaching ominous, against teaching divisive concepts, That's the phrase it uses a lot. And there's some definition of divisive concepts. We'll probably get into that later in the episode. But like whether any given comment matches their definition or not, right? Or whether any given lesson plan matches their definition or not, is contentious, right? It's not something anybody would agree on. There's lots of room for people to start self-censoring because they're afraid that if they say something that might be kind of innocuous, it might be seen as falling afoul of these standards. It might be, flying a little too close to the sun of these divisive concepts about race that you're supposed to keep out of the classroom. And ultimately, it's about firing people, and people being afraid of being fired. And so I think obviously it's unknowable, right? I mean, even when people do what would Michael Brooks think about intra-left controversy this week, even that's unknowable. And guy's only been gone for a little over a year, but it's still a little hard to say in some cases because we'll never know. I mean, part of what was so valuable about him is that he wasn't completely predictable, and he would often come at things from angles I didn't expect, and etc. And certainly when you play this game with Christopher Hitchens, if he'd been cancer in 2011, what would he think about something that's happening in 2021? It's even harder. Because he had some, very contradictory political views towards the end of his life, and which Hitchens, you got, in any given context was a little up in the air. But I think there's a chance that he would have sort of held on to his sort of pro-free speech, pro-open discussion of controversial ideas positions and said, no, screw you. We can't, he would have put it more colorfully, drunkenly. We would, no, I don't want some like petty McCarthyite bureaucrats, deciding, what goes on in a history classroom or who should be fired, for being too divisive. And I know, of course, a lot of times when people sort of imagine the, Hitchens living for another 10 years scenarios, they think, okay, well, look, I mean, the guy was not exactly, to put it in the terms of how people would have put it when he was still alive, was not particularly PC. He probably would have been canceled numerous times by now. I'm sure that's true. Sometimes at least some of them he would have deserved it, and other ones he wouldn't have deserved it, but I'm sure it's true. On the other hand, though, when it comes to this race stuff, I wouldn't be too quick to jump from that to the idea that he would necessarily be on the anti-woke side of any particular conversation. There's a debate that he did in late 2001, actually a few months after 9/11. So, keep in mind that, he was advocating war with Afghanistan and saying this at the same time, where he was on the pro-reparations side of the debate. And I think we have a brief clip from his argument for reparations where he's described.
There's a constant whine and drone, what I call a white whine, when this subject comes up. People say, what do you mean we'd have to go back and help the Comanches get there? You know how it goes. A rather nasty combination, actually, of self-pity and self-hatred.
And, as far as whether any of that nasty combination is on display in this particular context when people are arguing, about CRT and anti-CRT laws, it's, I think there's some room for disagreement about that. And again, I don't want state bureaucrats, who are not teachers, going into classrooms to decide what's taught and not taught. And this is all completely compatible with having some criticisms of critical race theory, right? Which we've talked about on the show before. So I'm not going to waste a lot of time now, but I mean, just to sort of, put it back on the table very briefly. Critical race theory comes out of critical legal studies, the sort of fundamental claim, the starting point, which is obviously correct, is that just achieving legal racial equality isn't enough to get rid of longstanding disparities that are caused by all of the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow and redlining and etc. Obviously true, undeniable. Where it gets harder to say is that there's a question of sort of diagnosis of what's going on there and potential solutions. And I think there you're going to have more, room for disagreement, from left perspectives about whether, in other words, is the main problem the sort of P plus P definition of structural racism, prejudice plus power, or is the main problem just normal capitalist property relations preserving the effects of past discrimination and oppression? And, depending on which of those things you think, there's room for coming to different conclusions. There's also room for debate about, what would count as justice, right? Would a sufficiently diverse ruling class ruling over demographically appropriate proportions of people living in poverty and, having to have, 7 jobs, to, support themselves in the gig economy, right? Would that count as justice? I don't think so, right? And this is the sort of critique that people like Adolph Reed, people like our friend Toure Reed, comes on the show about once a month to talk about movies and Patreon episodes. People like Cedric Johnson, the Field Sisters, etc. would make. To throw one white dude in that mix, it's also the critique that our late brother Michael Brooks, signed on to. I think we have a short clip of that.
Now, paradoxically, this is actually a reason why right now there's a lot of conflict between people who are more socialistic and people who are more like woke, quote unquote, because their moral dimension is better. Look, America is a racist society is correct. Acknowledging that truth versus denying that truth is a major difference, no question. However, if you read Adolph Reed, who's one of my intellectual heroes, I really hope everybody is reading him, he will tell you why racism and white supremacy is a multi-generational project in America that depends on economic conditions, that manifests in different geographies, that is inseparable for how we produce and do capitalism. And actually, it might become separable, right? Whereas some people who have a woke discourse, it just is. It's the religious foundation of America. There's no difference between any different historical periods. It's just this moral block statement. Does that make sense?
It does. But I do want to point out one thing here. Now, I completely agree with the critique that Michael is making in that clip. It's from his Mill Series lecture at Lafayette College, several months before he died. But I want to point out something here as it relates to the original subject, as it relates to the the Hitchens clip that we started out with. By the way, I realize since we're talking about Hitchens, I should, which is this. One of those bills that Lindsay was going around the country promoting in state legislatures. We have a little graphic here of the text from it. This is New Hampshire. And this is the part where it's defining those divisive concepts. A, one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. B, the state of New Hampshire, the United States, is fundamentally racist or sexist. C, any individual by virtue of his or her race or sex is inherently sexist, racist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. D, an individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or partly because of his race or sex, etc., 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 etc. We don't need to read the whole thing. But here's my point, and let's just keep it up for one more second. In that clip where Michael is criticizing woke liberalism from a sort of Adolph Reedish Marxist perspective, even so, if he'd said that, what he said in that clip in a high school classroom, and he was a history teacher, and this law were passed, he'd get fired. Because notice the first thing he said was basically B. The United States is a racist country is correct. So I think that tells you something about why this kind of attempt at this like heavy-handed meddling in what goes on in classrooms is so dangerous, quite separately from what you think about some of these ideas. What do you guys think?
I think it's striking. I didn't know about the example of the fire in a crowded theater, where it come from, or at least if I ever learned it, I forgot it. But a lot of these quotes that are always often appropriated by the center or the right about free speech were originally about socialists, right? Or at least I'm also thinking of, like, first they came for the socialists, right? And so when the left also takes on that kind of language, it's if you look at the origins of it, I think it points to the dangers of the left. Not that we should completely abandon the term fire in a crowded theater, but at least like how these terms could be used to actually be stifling dissent from the left,
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it was, I gotta say, I remember, like, I was mistaught what even the meaning of shouting fire in a crowded theater is, let alone shouting fire in a crowded luncheon hall at Hogwarts, I think is what Hitchens said.
I think fire is probably less dangerous in Hogwarts, because like you could just put it out with a spell, but yeah.
Unless it's magic fire.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say too, like, so At War with Dust says in the chat, right? Fire in a crowded theater if there's no fire, which of course is an important qualification, but I think it also goes to Hitchens' point about who gets to decide. Because, all right, like, what about those socialists who were arrested for anti-war agitation and opposing, conscription under Wilson? Like, were they people irresponsibly shouting fire when there was no fire, or was there damn well actually a fire and they were, appropriately firefighters? I don't really want to hand, cops, judges, etc., the power to make those determinations. I want to, I want to be able to like have open discussion about stuff like that. Certainly about World War I, or certainly about the racial history of the United States in a history classroom, where, again, are there certain aspects of things that, some critical race theorists, think that I would disagree with? Sure. We did a whole segment a while back where we talked about that Derek Bell short story, the Space Traders, and, and a sort of Marxist critique of that story. But here's the thing. If you assign that story in a high school English or history or social studies class, I would have no problem with that, right? Like, one, good teachers don't like dogmatically tell you what to think. They present ideas as a like prompt for discussion, and that actually sounds like an incredibly interesting day of class discussion. And whatever, even if we're talking about bad teachers who do dogmatically tell people what to think, all right, well, I had some of those. I think if anybody was sort of dogmatically telling people to agree with Derek Bell or Kimberly Crenshaw in a high school class, that wouldn't even crack the top 20 things that I most disagreed with that were often dogmatically presented to people in high school classes. Like, see every high school econ class ever, just to start with.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure, like, if you're a liberal, if you're like kind of a woke liberal coming out of high school, to your point, I think there are far worse things to be. And I was probably, I was liberal, but I could have been a little more woke, and I think that would have been fine. And I think I'd probably be in the same place, if not better, today. You could discover Ben Burgis later on in college, maybe, and incorporate some Marxism into your critiques of American society. But yeah, it's really not the worst thing in the world.
Exactly.
And also as a parent, I would be very happy if my children were learning college levels, pre-law, in high school. So, there's
that sounds like a good fucking high school.
Yeah. I mean,
hey, I read
college credit for it.
I read The Fountainhead in high school and thought it was a great book, and then I just never thought about it again until like later. So who's to say you're gonna pick up these books and they're gonna change your life?
Yeah, exactly. Like, look, I might prefer Adolph Reed's analysis of some of this stuff to Kimberly Crenshaw's, but it could be so much worse. You could be reading Fountainhead.
Exactly.
So, speaking of bad political ideas, how do you guys' Thanksgiving go? You managed to avoid having any huge political fights with your extended families?
This year, yes, because we didn't have anybody over.
You didn't argue with yourself. No, everything was good for me. Even I think there were a range of beliefs there, but no debate. But according to some people online, I did a terrible disservice, right, by not screaming and yelling at my conservative family members, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. So Luke Savage, who is a writer for Jacobin and The Atlantic, he sent around in a WhatsApp chat a little while ago, and he gave me permission to use this on the show. A little meme illustrating a lot of online discourse about this. Do we have Luke's meme? So this, anybody listening to this later on the podcast, this is the Galaxy Brain, meme. The first one says, enjoyed a nice Thanksgiving dinner with your family. Second one says, how to argue with your conservative relatives over turkey. Third way says 5 ways to completely humiliate the rubes and fly over a country you've left behind during your obligatory annual visit. And last one says why it's vital to report your pro-insurrectionist relatives to the cops and pledge eternal allegiance to God Empress Rachel Maddow. Don't do any of that.
Yeah,
I guess would be my take.
Or what I did one year when my stepfather started calling Mexicans, like immigrants as dirty and all this kind of stuff. Stood up and tapped my chest and said, "What, you want some?" After telling him why he's wrong. So
go straight to violence.
The best way to go.
Skip discourse and go straight to violence.
Just go for violence.
It's a J. Andy method. I just try to normalize. I mean, I don't think you should turn. I don't think you should turn the family into your number one political, where you're going to wage war. I just try to normalize it. Hey, I'm a union organizer, and this is just talk about unions without it having be polemical. And to me, if anything, that's going to be better than if I try to bring out that graph of productivity of wage labor versus versus the dividend, how much wages they're actually receiving. I don't think graphs are really going to change any minds over Thanksgiving turkey. How about you? Yeah. Did you get any shouting matches?
No, I didn't. I did
Pie
not.
Charts go over well on Thanksgiving.
Pie charts, yeah, right. Should have a gong sound effect for that. Yeah, I did not. And look, I mean, I'm usually reluctant to divulge too much about the opinions of people who don't have public presences, but I don't think they'll mind me saying this, right? My like we spent Thanksgiving with my in-laws in South Texas, and they're extremely conservative, right? But I did not, right? I think this is a context in which you should not, in fact, give them an argument. That like every now and again you should hold back because, in fact, in the book of the same name, I talked about how it's important to pick your battles. And I think, having everybody get mad and have a bad time during a family get together is probably not a battle that's worth picking. I mean, one-on-one person-to-person persuasion is actually really important, right? I mean, obviously, you know that from union organizing, and like that's no doubt about it. But also, the way when one-on-one person-to-person persuasion works, it tends to be when people like you and they want to agree with you, and if you're taking Thanksgiving dinner as a chance to to educate your family members, they're probably not going to like you very much, right? Like just they're probably going to be pretty annoyed with you, and honestly, who could blame them? I mean, that's my ice cold take. Just don't be an annoying weirdo. Family get-togethers. You're not doing.
That take will never go over well on Twitter. Don't be an annoying weirdo. That is just aggressively against the ethos of Twitter.
Yeah, exactly.
Flip the table, start the fight.
Yeah. So anyway, meanwhile, though, somebody who has had a lot to say, we're going to get into this, about how one-on-one persuasion should work, is James Lindsay. And we are going to get into that in just a minute. But meanwhile, let's bring on our main guests for today. So there's Sean KB from the Antifada, and Sam Hoadley-Brill, who is a philosophy graduate student, and I believe a world level James Lindsay expert.
Galaxy level, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a PhD in math though, in order to understand James Lindsay and his ideology?
You're a math professor, right? Not a sociology professor?
Yeah, we actually have that clip. Let's watch that.
And you're a math professor, correct? Not a sociology professor?
I am a PhD in mathematics who's been studying the relevant academic literature full-time, 16 hours a day, most days of the week for the past 3 years. And we can talk about that briefly in a moment, but I want to talk about the bill itself first, as it's modeled after the executive order that President Trump issued in September. And it doesn't even technically ban critical race theory. It certainly doesn't ban the teaching of critical race theory. It certainly doesn't ban diversity or anti-racist or racial sensitivity training, and people should be clear about that. So it's not shutting down the ability to have diversity training or education or to cover these subjects in an academic manner in school, so it should be made clear. On the other hand, it does ban things that are central to the United States. It bans, or central to, the opposite of them is central to the United States. It bans racial scapegoating. It bans racial stereotyping. It bans racial discrimination. It bans naming the country or state, in this case, as being intrinsically evil or racist or sexist. It bans the same things for sex and race. Racial scapegoating, sex scapegoating, racial stereotyping, sex stereotyping, and discrimination for both. These are not things that we really want to try to bring back into this country. We spent a long time getting away from them.
Who could argue that?
We fixed all the problems. All we got to do is stop talking about it, and then that'll be okay. Again, but
yeah. So now I also do not have a PhD in math. I just want to admit that straight off, right? So I am at a disadvantage here. But if he spends 16 hours a day reading the academic literature, where the fuck does he get all this time to be on Twitter? He seems to be tweeting like 300 times a day.
16 hours a day, or full time, 16 hours a day, most days of the week for the past 3 years.
Maybe that gives us a sense, if he's tweeting the entire time while he's studying this stuff, how deeply he's actually read and understood the material.
Exactly.
He's got Twitter in one hand and like intros dummy to Hegel or whatever in the other.
And then he's got the Twitter app and then the Safari app with the Wikipedia of Michel Foucault pulled up. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned Hegel because I think this is not the most important way James Lindsay has had a bad effect on the world, but it is a small thing I find very annoying. Like I just did this debate, I don't know, a couple months ago with Charlie Kirk, and there's a point where he said in the debate, like he said, so what do you think about, Karl Marx? And I started to say, like the stuff I thought that Marx was right about. And I said, I think his theory of history is basically right. He was like, oh, that's like Hegel's theory of history. And I said, no, right? That's pretty different. And then like he spent like a minute arguing that it was like really important that I admit that like Marx's theory of history is basically the same thing as Hegel's theory of history. And I was wondering about that later. It's like, this is so random. Like shouldn't it be the other way around, that like the own on Hegel is that he leads to Marx, right? Like what? And then I realized, no, this is fucking James Lindsay because he's taught all the conservatives that Hegel is the root of all evil.
Yes. It's not philosophy. It's not critique of philosophy that he's doing. What he's doing is a demonology. And because he's a conservative and because conservatives are allergic to understanding things as structural, allergic to some material basis. Oh, what's that right there?
This is a book that is making the same points that you're making right now.
Cool. Yeah. I love that book. That's my favorite new book now. But because conservatives are allergic to this sort of materialist explanation of things, they can't seriously confront first these ideas, or second why these ideas are in the world. Like they couldn't have an imminent critique of it. So instead of trying to understand these ideas and how they might have arisen and affect society and how certain people are inspired by them, whether they match society or whether they don't, it's instead a demonology, because it's trying to find the bad ideas out there that the bad people have come up with, and it's laughable, really. But he's out there. He's saying this shit all the time, and millions of people are liking, retweeting, and reading and listening to him.
Yeah, if you go check out his page nowadays, like he doesn't go more than like 14 minutes without a tweet. Like it's really scary because I have seen myself become more like that over the past year, and like, but the extent to which James Lindsay like is a professional tweeter is pretty insane. Yeah,
it's incredible. If I could sidebar for a second, I had a very serious hobby for about a year or so, and that was anytime James Lindsay came up with some dipshit horrific reading of Marx and or Hegel, or equating critical race theory with Marxism or whatever, I would quote tweet him or I'd comment under it, and I got some good burns on the fucking guy, really good burns. And then one day a guy by the name of Ben Burgis pops up and he says, I'm thinking about doing an episode on James Lindsay, anybody want to come on? And I was like, yeah, I'm in. And I told him, we went back and forth, and that was when he finally banned me. The motherfucker heard the footsteps.
Oh,
so
he blocked you?
Yeah, he blocked me. So now,
Dude,
not only is my access to Lindsayism, to conceptual Jamesism gone, but also all of those beautiful quote tweets that I owned him and dunked on him on are gone like tears in the rain. It's sad, but it's worth it.
You have to have the screenshot for Lindsay. Like I don't even entertain because I'm pretty sure you still can quote tweet someone. Like if you just copy the link from like a burner account, like you could still do it, but I'm like, no, dude, like I know that like a fifth of my followers are blocked by James Lindsay.
Yeah, totally. Well, he would never respond, even though like I was doing this like a few times a week. And I think it was because he understands what he is in some like deep subconscious sense, which is that he's a fucking Sood. He's like the king of the Soods. You know, this is a guy who was like, I'm sure relatively smart in mathematics. He obviously has a PhD. He studied very widely in that. But then as he got imbued in this sort of like conservative, reactionary, right wing and like backlash politics, all of a sudden now he says, well, I know math. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to crack the code on Hegel and Marx. And his mouth fucking runs. And he's like the perfect example of like an autodidactic Sood who is completely full of shit, but absolutely convinced that he knows the answers to these questions because only he is smart enough. Only he should get the clout for finding like the real Marxist agenda or whatever the fuck.
He's a lot like Trump, like personality wise. Like I think I'm not a scientist.
Trump strikes me as having I think Trump is having more fun with it than Lindsay is. Like Lindsay just seems to be perpetually angry.
Yeah, he's pissed off. He wakes up mad for sure. Like, whereas Trump is kind of like, oh, I eat a cheeseburger. Okay. Like,
yeah, I mean, like Trump seems like somebody who is who really, really enjoys a certain kind of trolling. Like I remember when he, his first New Year's, New Year's 2017, as president, he had this tweet that was like, Happy New Year's to all, even the haters who tried so hard to destroy me.
The losers and haters. He was great at it, man. Twitter was really his venue. He slayed on that app.
You remember he just tweeted, despite the constant negative press, Covfefe? He just tweeted that. That was amazing.
No, exactly. I mean, look, I agree with I think Will Bedecker said this a while back, right? Like Donald Trump should probably be in prison, but he should still be allowed to tweet from there. Like the world shouldn't be denied the Trump Twitter account.
Maybe the best poster.
And Trump's Twitter, like as a public broadcasting.
You can argue about who the best poster in all time was, but nobody else has posted their way to the seat of the highest office in the most powerful empire in human civilization. All right, that is one powerful poster.
I received one small loan from my father of 1 million followers.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I do believe that Lindsay has read more, although I also think that he's reading in a very particular way, right? Like I don't believe that he's magically, tweeting 500 times a day and also reading for 16 hours a day. But I believe that he's probably spent a lot of time reading, but he's reading in the way that like somebody who believes that that like aliens are sending him coded messages in the newspaper, and he needs to like find every fifth letter of of every other line to decode the message.
I think it's I agree, and I think I would go one step further, which is that he's reading in order to get the answer that he's already decided, which is that wokeism and critical race theory, as they would call it, or as we would understand it, like critical pedagogy and like diversity and equity programs, are derivatives of Marxism. And so all you have to do is take those and find the lineage, go back into the genealogy in order to, with his dumb pseudoscientific brain, try to understand what the bad people are thinking. So he's found, he knows what he wants to argue. He has to read back 250 years of philosophy in order to figure out why he's right. And that's what he does.
It was really interesting, like my experiences, because I've done a lot of like, unpaid, completely, just I'm a psychopath, like just researching his Twitter and just like, okay, what does this dude actually think? Where does he get this idea that, and then I searched his critical race theory stuff over time, and he's been using the acronym CRT for 4 years now. And you watch his conception of whatever boogeyman he's talking about most recently evolve, because he posts screenshots of whatever he's reading like the first time he reads it.
He posts a lot of Marxist.org.
He posts Marxist.org. He posts a lot of Herbert Marcuse from like different pages in one book, like not even consecutively, that don't at all say what it claims that they're saying. And like I've watched critical race theory go from, it's Michel Foucault's concept of power knowledge, and it's all this power knowledge stuff, and the grid, the grid, and that's a problem. And it's like they just see history so pessimistically. They think everyone's evil and it's all just about power. And it goes from that to Derrida deconstruction. You hear about that? You guys hear about deconstruction? Like words don't actually mean anything, and you could say whatever you want, and a critical race theorist will say, well, that's racist because I make the rules. Like just the most straw man things you can think of. And then it goes to, Derek Bell. Oh, yeah, Derek Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw. She used the term postmodernism in a footnote. And then I'm going to make a thesis that I'm going to write a book with that thesis. And it'll become like the number one philosophy Amazon section book, Cynical Theories, right? And it's funny, too, because like Helen wrote that book, almost all of it. And he'll take credit for it being his book, right? He'll be like, oh, it's in my book, a best-selling author. But he has disavowed the thesis of the book publicly.
Has he really?
Because the thesis of Cynical Theories, the thesis of Cynical Theories is that postmodernism is the origin of all this evil thought, right? He goes, postmodernism, which he's like, there's this, this is all Helen, really, Pluckrose. She's like the postmodern knowledge principle and the political principle, and it's just complete horseshit. They didn't even give the like pages where she claims to be finding this in Foucault. Like, it's really garbage. But yeah, so she identifies it in postmodernism, and that's interesting. Helen is more sympathetic to left-wing economic thought. And I don't know if she's read Marx particularly.
Yeah, I should say that like I haven't interacted with her a ton, right? Mm-hmm. But I have enough, like she, REO magazine that she used to edit, like I've had stuff published in there, and like I've seen her tweets and stuff. And my impression of Helen Pluckrose is that she's somebody who's like, I think she's wrong about postmodernism, but like I think that she's like, but also she's not a lunatic, and also like she probably votes for the Labor Party. Yeah,
I think that's true. Well, I mean, I don't know how she votes or whatever.
No,
but,
no.
like,
I mean, that last one
economically,
is just kind of
yeah.
an extrapolation from like
Right.
things I've seen her say on Twitter that like, you know, that if she does it, it's not because she has any deep, you know,
Mhm.
she's like way to the right of that or anything like that, right? You know, that
Yeah.
my sense is that like her collaboration with Lindsay probably represents like this very brief point where like, you know, trains pass through the night where like they have where like, you know, Lindsay, like Helen probably thought basically the stuff they said in critical theories for years, and she probably basically still thinks all that now.
Yeah.
You know, whereas like Lindsay, that was like one stop and you know, like a very
ivermectin time.
Yeah. And World Economic Forum, you know, he posts a lot of these memes where it's whatever Charles Schwab from the
Schwab.
Okay. So you should explain this the Charles Schwab World Economic Forum thing, because I think people who don't spend all their time reading tweets about this like might not be familiar.
Oh, sure. Actually, I realized I didn't even retweet this. I'm online right now. What's the point of being online when I haven't tweeted it out? Yeah, sorry. What was the question again? I'm being
Charles Schwab.
myself.
Schwab. Yeah.
So the World Economic Forum is like it's a nonprofit. It's a bunch of internationalists, global capitalists, and politicians and thought leaders who come together and do what those types of people do, which is look at the sort of trends of capitalist development and society and politics, and then find some thread that's actually happening and say, this is where we should go. This is what we should be doing. So during COVID, so like a year and change ago, they came out with a really, honestly, scary looking, if you're not like imbued with the sort of, I don't know, brainstem of international capital, this scary video that was like, you will own nothing and you will be happy. You know, you will no longer buy houses anymore. You will rent. And what they're talking about is like having enough Uber type apps or like Airbnb type apps, that personal ownership of commodities will no longer be the way that you are able to like have housing and cars. But what it comes through as to people like James Lindsay, and certainly the people who are even dumber than him who follow them, is that this is a Marxist conspiracy by capitalists, you know, because communism and capitalism, it doesn't really make sense how those are connected.
It's just the Jews.
It's really
That's all you gotta do.
Yeah, you're basically creating a structurally anti-Semitic theory for why the world is changing. And that's honestly, it's the basis of Lindsay claims he's not an anti-Semite. And I know, Ben, that you have clips on that, but his theory is structurally anti-Semitic. A small cabal of influential people behind the scenes are coming together in order. They're using both capitalism and communism. Right, this is like protocols of Ansatz and protocols of the Elders of Zion type shit, and they have control everywhere, and they're pulling the puppet strings. It's basically just he doesn't have the guts to say it's Jews.
Literally, he said that out loud. Like, it's crazy.
So Jake, I think we do have that. James Lindsay explaining his views about the Frankfurt School and why that doesn't make him anti-Semitic.
For me, who ties it to its historical roots, for example, in the Frankfurt School of critical theory, which is correct to tie it to that. Those guys were all Jews. The so-called cultural Marxism conspiracy theory, that's the Wikipedia entry now, there is no cultural Marxism explained there. There's just a conspiracy theory, is that, these Frankfurt School Jews wanted to overturn Western civilization, and that's a conspiracy theory. It's anti-Semitic. So I said there are people, as somebody who criticizes that a lot, people come to me all the time and they're like, James, just admit that it is actually Jews. I'm like, no, it's communists. And they're like, just take the last step. So all these actual anti-Semites are always trying to get me to go that far. And I said, and I've had some very scary conversations with some from far-right characters, not Nazis, but like kind of mainstream dudes who are getting more and more seduced. And I said, there's going to be a rising, or there is a rising far-right anti-Semitism that's new from that normal baseline. And I warned about this. And then some important blue check people immediately accused me of blaming Jews for anti-Semitism, which is one of these third rail things that you're not allowed to touch. And I was like, well, I'm going to continue to point out this problem because we're headed to a catastrophe.
This is a total thing. Like, why do all the guys at the gay bar try to suck my dick all the time? You know,
literally. You know what I mean? Oh my! He's like, Listen, I believe about these Frankfurt School intellectuals the exact same thing as literal Nazis.
And they are Jewish. They are Jewish.
They are. It's not. But they're not trying to, mongrelize the white race and destroy Western civilization because they're Jews. It's because they're communists.
Yeah. Well,
guys.
there's a quote from Joseph Stalin in the late 1920s where he says, "We fight the oppositionists not because they're Jews, but because they're oppositionists." Which is like a really neat way of slipping in because they're Jews. Into the sentence. It's like just
exactly.
They just happen to be at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. Someone responded when I tweeted that clip. Someone responded and was like, "What? A guy can't pontificate about a bunch of Jewish intellectuals conniving, scheming to undermine Western civilization without being called an anti-Semite?"
I mean, you can do all those things, but don't expect for the real anti-Semites who just go that one step further not to see you as a fellow traveler.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. Like, I don't think.
Awesome.
Yes, the tweet says.
Lord.
Lindsay says, "Just going to leave this here." And there's a 2014 Wikipedia entry on cultural Marxism, and the 2021 says cultural Marxism conspiracy theory. Because I don't know, the globalists have changed it to
they're globalists
to describe it as a conspiracy theory.
Hillary Clinton is a goddamn demon.
But I've got to say, I mean, I don't know if it's I mean, maybe it's just because I'm a person of globalist heritage, but like I think that the maybe it's because I don't say stuff like this. I've actually never had a Nazi asking me when I was going to go the last step, separating me from being a Nazi.
I didn't have that. No, I didn't.
I never had that either. Yeah, never been down that road before.
Oh yeah, did you see the thing where he was calling this Jewish pediatrician Dr. Lampshades?
What?
Yeah, no, I was tweeting about it, and I was like,
vaccine stuff.
It was one of the doctors who is very publicly sort of opposing the misinformation campaigns, trying to help with what do they call that shit? Denialism, science denialism.
Jewish doctor.
He called him Dr. Lampshades, and I just was on my burner account, just casually stalking James Lindsay as I do, to really do a little research, and then I just come across Dr. Lampshades, and whenever I hear the word lampshade, I just think about my mom explaining the first encounter with anti-Semitism that she had when she was a kid, where some just random motherfucker on the street said, she would make a nice lampshade, in reference to my mom, and my grandma had to explain to her what that is all about. So maybe people don't know, but there's this kind of cultural lore, it's apparently a myth, but we're not actually sure. I did a little looking into it, but the idea was that Nazis had made lampshades out of Jewish people's skin.
It's a
yeah.
I mean whether it's entirely whatever, that's a classic thing that people have heard. And so I don't want to lean too far on calling him an anti-Semite, although I do have to say that was the least convincing denial of anti-Semitism I've ever seen in my entire life.
I would want to say one thing, because I think this is really important, is that the development of capitalism, it's spread around the globe, and also modernism per se. These sorts of abstract processes that are not controlled by individuals, they are literally systemic in a Marxist sense. Scared the shit out of people 150 years ago. They scare people today. This is literally just the dialectic moving us through history in a very, very grand way. But whether it's the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which were forged in Tsarist Russia in order to blame all this modernism, all these changes on a particular group of people, a convenient one, or whether it's today, these sorts of structurally anti-Semitic arguments always come up because, again, if you don't have a structural reading of history, you don't understand this movement of history, the dialectic, understand where modernism and postmodernism comes from. It simply just has to be bad actors. And how do you explain the 20th century, which is filled with communism and capitalism? both of them, you know, like very chaotic and whatever, without having some central character there at the center moving history. And so again, Lindsay might not, he literally might not be an anti-Semite, but the reason why all of these gay guys at the bar are trying to suck his dick is that it's already anti-Semitic to the core. It's got all the basis of that. He's just too fucking stupid to realize.
Yeah, right. I think that's right. Like, I mean, this is, I mean, you know, the classic thing is August Babel, you know, calling anti-Semitism, you know, the socialism of fools, you know, because the, you know, if you have this sort of, you know, not wrong view that, that the, you know, that there are a lot of things happening that, you know, don't reflect the will of the majority of the population, that, you know, that you're, that, you know, that your, you know, your material interests don't seem to be served, you know, by the status quo, etc. But you don't have any structural analysis of what's wrong with the system that produces that result. Then you end up having to say that there's some sort of shadowy conspiracy that's doing it. I mean, that becomes kind of your only option, you know. And if you and then if you do the thing that, you know, that a lot of people who go that far, you know, do, and say, well, this is not, you know, this is going to be both. You're like, all right, we don't want to be, you know, communist because that's you know, part of, like, you know, if they were doing that, right, they wouldn't have to go down this other route anyway, right? So we also think that's bad. If you're already kind of a conspiracy theorist, like the move of conspiracy theorists is always to say that all the things they don't like are related to each other, that there's some like meta thing that's, you know, that's driving all the bad stuff. And man, I mean, like, culturally, there is a, you know, if you want to say that the capitalist bankers and the communist revolutionaries and the and, you know, chaos in the streets and all this stuff is controlled by a shadowy conspiracy, then, you know, there is a very culturally available place to go there.
For sure. And I would add too, and maybe, I don't know, you can use this to branch out elsewhere, but I was thinking about this the other day, and even though there are no people of communism in power anywhere in the United States, even though communists such as myself are a very, very small, tiny minority within the American and global population, we are currently in the dumbest Red Scare in American history, because the way that, without using anti-Semitism, what the James Lindsays and Christopher Rufos and who else, Jimmy Kirk, whatever his name is, what these people Charlie Kirk. What these people have to fall back on is a grand communist conspiracy. And so our stupid Red Scare is because there's no communists, but they have to bring back all this backlash politics that comes out after Black Lives Matter. They have to try to find some thread, you know, some thread. And the thread is all the bad people are communists. This is communist influence.
Yeah, so this is a tweet. James is quote tweeting Emmanuel Aka, who says, as you digest the guilty verdict of Ahmed Arbery's murderers, remember this is not justice, but accountability. Justice implies true restoration, which is impossible in this case. This accountability, which is the first step towards justice, hashtag Ahmed Arbery. And Lindsay says, justice means communism. That's when...
I mean, I agree with that myself. I'm not sure he means it the same way I do.
Justice means communism. Oh my God.
Yeah, which is actually kind of, you know, an interesting thread, because something I keep thinking about, right, when I think about James Lindsay, which is something I didn't used to do a lot because he just sort of seemed like a crazy person on Twitter. And, you know, whatever. I mean, Twitter is a garden in which many different kinds of crazy people bloom, you know, you know, so this is another flower in that garden, you know. I didn't really think about it that much. You know, like you have your you know, you have your Neera Tandons, you have your Amy Teresas, you have your James Lindsays, you know, like whatever, you know, that's the you know, that's the deal. But then, like, he started going around the country pushing anti-CRT bills and state legislatures. It's like, oh, wait a second, this one got out of the garden, right? Like he's out there in the real world, like actually having large and important effects on things that happen in material reality. And I should actually start to pay some attention to this guy. And then I started to think, well, okay, like a lot of, you know, when I started to do the kind of thing that I do like a few years ago, like that was like the sort of high watermark of the Jordan Peterson cult, right? That was like that was like really when like Peterson was like at the kind of peak of his popularity, and like I spent a lot of an unhealthy amount of time, right, like reading and watching and thinking about Jordan Peterson. And Peterson has this sort of grand unified theory of all the stuff that he doesn't like, which is that
postmodern neo-Marxism.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
right?
postmodern neo-Marxism, man.
Oh, that is actually much better than I can do as a Jordan.
I don't have a good Kermit voice myself. You did a great job, Sam.
You ever seen Pinocchio?
Yeah, fun fact: the very first video that is on YouTube that Michael Brooks and I are both on. Michael's just a voice in the background in the audience, but I say something about Jordan Peterson and I quote something he says, and Michael heckles to do his Kermit the Frog impression, saying the thing that I just said.
He was very good at that.
It was. And there was a thing like a little while ago, it was like a week or two ago, I don't know, it all blurs together, where Peterson got mad at somebody who, to be fair, was being a dick to him. Like they sort of called him a racist in a way that was a little bit random. They brought up his struggles with direction, but like his response to it was amazing. It was so literally the kind of shit that Michael would have said doing his Jordan Peterson impression. It was like, say that to my face, bucko, and we'll see who needs the benzo.
Yeah, I saw that. That was incredible. And he didn't even he didn't even quote tweet the right person. He actually quote tweeted himself.
Again.
Fucking the Twitter, like Ben said, just really destroys brains.
I try to do the thing on Twitter, but it's not that easy. It gets really difficult, and I can't feel my thumbs. These postmodern neo-Marxists, man. Oh, these egalitarian demons. They're demons. Bloody demons. Good God.
Yeah, that's good. So Ethan, thank you for the super chat, says, I'll be the first to admit that I am a postmodern neo-Marxist globalist trying to subvert Western civilization. Appreciate that. So now, since my mind is not as agile as Jordan Peterson's, I don't actually understand how you could be both a postmodernist and Marxist. Those seem pretty different to me. But,
study some philosophy, Ben.
Okay.
Well, try reading Derrida then.
But Derrida had that specters of Marx, so there you go. He said the word Marx in it, so he must be a Marxist.
Yes, that's the rule.
I read the Communist
if you have Marx in the title of one of your books,
you're a Marxist.
Then you're a Marxist. Doesn't matter what the book says about Marx. Whether the book says, well, basically Marx is wrong about everything, but there's a certain spirit of critique that you should, whatever, which is basically all Derrida says in that, stupid book. But anyway, so the Jordan Peterson grand unified theory of all the stuff he doesn't like is Marxism equals postmodernism equals green-haired college kids yelling at him about pronouns. That's roughly the theory. And it seems to me that James has really updated this because his grand unified theory, as far as I can tell, I think both of you guys have spent more time than I have on this, but as far as I can tell, it goes something like this. Marxism equals maybe postmodernism, definitely equals critical theory, Frankfurt School, equals critical race theory, equals green-haired college kids, equals the CDC, equals Joe Biden, equals the Squad, equals DSA, equals
Chinese communism.
Equals Chinese communism. I think that's it.
Yeah.
I have to imagine that he was inspired by not just Jordan Peterson's really horrific takes and this creation of his postmodern neo-Marxism. I'm sure he was also inspired by Jordan Peterson because Jordan Peterson used that shit to become the hottest public intellectual for a few years before all the contradictions of his life led to a horrific benzo addiction and almost dying, actually. But Jordan Peterson now can be a sort of aspiration for people like Lindsay, especially people that don't know what the fuck they're talking about and want to get millions and millions of followers and lots of money.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and this is interesting too, because we're talking about how the point where Lindsay co-wrote Cynical Theories with Pluckrose is kind of one particular stage in that development. So I just want to illustrate how the development is going. So we do have a quote from another book that Lindsay wrote, a co-wrote, like Cynical Theories. This is a co-written book. It's co-written with Peter Boghossian, who actually I'm not totally sure. There's a very well-known philosopher who also has the surname Boghossian. I don't know if they're related or not, but in any case,
Paul Boghossian.
Yeah. There we go. Yeah,
it's just a common Armenian name, or
yeah.
Could be
but the weird thing is they look pretty similar. Like they do look like they could be brothers.
So what you're saying is they all look alike.
Oh no. Well, I mean, I am saying that, but like that wasn't what I was saying.
Yeah. Paul Boghossian, I've got to say, the one time I met him, I thought he was cool. I like he came to give a talk, University of Miami. I was a grad student there, and and we we're sitting out at like a bar in South Beach, drinking mojitos and stuff, and and he struck me as very likable. Peter seems to be like if he's related, he's I don't know if they're sending their best Boghossians, but Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay wrote this book called Impossible Conversations. And in Impossible Conversations, the idea is this is how you should argue about ideas. This is back when James Lindsay was going through his civil discourse phase, that it's really important that we learn to talk to each other without yelling at each other. And he had, and in this, at this point, right, in that book, they even say things like, this applies to anybody, right? You should be able to have one of these conversations where you change minds with anybody. They actually explicitly use the example of KKK members. There's and they give the example of this black guy who convinced a lot of people to quit the Klan and had I
think it's Daryl Davis.
Yeah, and they would turn over their robes to him, and so he has a closet full of Klan robes. So really, according to them, you should be able to do this with anybody. So this is a quote from that book. Speak about ideas and beliefs, not the people who hold them. Be especially careful with labeling people based on some or just one of their beliefs. Quote, Bill believes healthcare should be free for everyone and paid for by taxes, unquote, is much more accurate, fair, and specific than, quote, Bill is a socialist, unquote. Now, that's where it was. I want to show the state of the art. This is a couple days ago. He tweeted this. This was he's quote tweeting DSA San Francisco, saying that their education committee they were reading some Lenin in their education committee, which presumably is something that they and James Lindsay have in common. I assume during those 16 hours a day of reading theoretical text, he must have read some Lenin at some point.
Yeah, some Lenin.
You would think so. And also understand the different conversations Lenin was having with other Bolsheviks and other communists, understood their arguments and what they were. Yeah, I'm sure he's got through it all. Yeah.
He thought about the fact that there were some Jews around. He thought about it.
Didn't conclude much of anything, but he thought about it. So he quote tweets this and says, democratic socialism, in parentheses, at AOC, is just a facade for communism. And I've got to say, without I'm a centrist on the is AOC good or bad, wars, people have on the left, but she did vote present on funding the Iron Dome. If that's communism, then what would James Lindsay make of me, never mind Sean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're looking at right now a sort of intellectual journey that our friend Conceptual James has made over the last. When was the quote about the civility stuff? It was 4 or 5 years ago or something like that. Or?
Not that long ago.
Yeah, no, I think it was
2018, 2019.
2019. Wow.
So 2-3 years ago, it was all civility. It was all cynical theories. It was all, we don't have to cast aspersions on one another.
Liberalism. We just need liberalism.
Literally classical liberalism. But what has happened to James Lindsay between then and now is probably a question for his therapist, his psychologist, maybe Jack Dorsey. I don't know. Someone can answer that question. But
I think no, go ahead. Finish your point first.
But what is true is certainly it's not just Lindsay that changed. It's society has changed a lot in the last 2 or 3 years. You could say it's good, you could say it's bad, but it certainly has. The end of the Trump administration, but before that, the Black Lives Matter uprising that we had an entire summer, and also like it wasn't just QAnon people. When Trump lost for a lot of people on the right, it really fucked up their worldview. And I'll end there. What I'm saying is that for the James Lindsay people, it's been a very traumatizing last couple of years. A lot of things are not making sense for them. The people who are simply green-haired, like SJWs a few years ago, who maybe could be reasoned with, have all of a sudden become raging Antifa communists working with the Democratic Party to overthrow Christianity and Western civilization. And that's a reflection of the times we're in. It affects James Lindsay, I guess, like it does a lot of other people.
Yeah, fair enough. RC Roberts, thank you for the super chats. Says Lissa here, Bucko, have 5 buckos for a very interested existential Marxist. I think that's certainly true. I think that like even before all of that, right? I think just COVID, like, the fact that that so many people, to one extent or another, depending on whether they even could with their jobs and for how long and all that stuff. But so many people spent so long having less human contact than they had before. Like, I think like supercharged everything that's happened since then, because like, yeah, I mean, that's like, you go stir crazy. It's like the Simpsons episode where Homer and Mr. Burns are like snowed in together, and and there's a point where he says, look at him there, sitting there sending paranoid thoughts into my head. There's a little bit of that. So I think that is at least one level of what's going on with James Lindsay. Although I don't know, he might have already been spending 20 hours a day on Twitter before this. But Sam, you were going to give us your theory of what's happened to James Lindsay.
What happened to James Lindsay? I think it's a really interesting case study and like audience creator radicalization feedback loop, where if you watch if you guys know Timba on Toast, he does those like
before, yeah.
He has this incredible 3-part documentary series on Dave Rubin, and just like how did Dave Rubin, how does that happen? Like, how does Dave Rubin happen? And just like his audience, right? Because he's claims to be this left liberal, right? But he's like, I'm just kind of concerned. Things are getting kind of crazy. Like, I'm just going to have exclusively right-wingers come on, including people like Stefan Molyneux come over and be like, black people and white people have different brain sizes, like right. On my fucking TV, on my little show. And like, okay, of course you're going to attract white supremacist audience. Then, if he gives too much sympathy.
When I did a debate with Stefan Molyneux like a year and change ago, and his chat did seem to be very interested in the question of whether I look Jewish. There's a lot of hot speculation about,
not surprised about that
about that. Which, although I did really enjoy the fact that over the course of it, right, like I kept trying to get him to talk about immigration because it seems like the obvious giant contradiction in his worldview, right? Like, he's allegedly a libertarian, like an anarcho-capitalist. He claims sometimes, right? But like he also wants the state.
So this is also a historical thing. So many Stefan Molyneux of the last 10 to 15 years, because you guys all remember, it used to be libertarians were the main people that were like on the fringes of things on the right, and they had their own kind of worldview or whatever. By and large, those people are fucking gone, and most of them have gone the Molyneux route. Because again, libertarianism kind of broke down. Its back was broken around 2016 or so. And so white nationalism and race science and stuff like that really picked up the slack on that.
It's yeah.
Yeah. And right. I mean, like his defense of the immigration thing was that that, you know, it's actually bad for third world countries to have brain drain, and it's bad for, you know, black people in the United States to have, you know, Mexicans taking their jobs. And so I was very proud. I managed to get the last word at the very end, which was that if what I'm hearing is that you're okay with violating libertarian principles every time that would help black people in the third world, we disagree about far less than I thought we did, right? Like, because that's, you know, that really opens the door there. But yeah, no, I think like even Molyneux's progression, right? Like which was very advanced by the time he was on Dave Rubin's show, like does probably say something about that, right? I mean, like there is like Molyneux strikes me as a really cynical guy, you know, that he, you know, you can tell he has some, you know, theatrical training. He and like he did this video where he actually said like, well, you know, I've criticized white nationalism.
That's when he went to Poland and had his racial awakening. You know what, Molyneux,
white women.
what Molyneux also has, which he had, I don't think James Lindsay has, is he has a dark sort of charisma. He's got like a Marshall Applewhite type, you know who I'm talking about, the Heaven's Gate guy. He's got that sort of charisma.
I'll talk like this.
So he could really form his own, like he had some sort of like movement that he was doing, like philosophical race science or whatever it is. James Lindsay isn't on that level. I hate to say it, the guy's got kind of a
he can't produce audio content that sounds anything like because Stefan Molyneux will come in and start talking like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and even like Jordan Peterson, we were talking about earlier, like Jordan Peterson does have a weird kind of charisma to him. You know?
Oh,
like,
yeah. He can talk like a motherfucker. Yeah.
Yeah. Like part of it is almost like this like tent revival preacher thing that like he always sounds like he's on the edge of an emotional breakdown. But
right.
Like, he also
and then I'll just start crying in the middle of my speech.
But, you know, he's so intense all the time, and he has this aura about him. Like, he has this, like, forbidden wisdom that he's going to, like, share with you. Whereas, I mean, I don't know, man. I mean, like, with those clips we watched earlier of James Lindsay, actually, let's get the world-level expert one, because I think it would be a tragedy not to include
it. Lindsay's more of an ideas guy, you know.
Are they talking about ideas?
16 hours a day, 3 days a week. He's just doing the ideas.
16 hours a day, most days of the week. For the past 3 years. James
doesn't have to be out there out front like Lenin. He's like behind the scenes, you know. He's the one in the archives doing the deep research so that Christopher Rufo can go out and spread his wings.
Literally, I was about to mention this. Like, one thing people don't know about James Lindsay and should know is that the entire Chris Rufo campaign that on critical race theory that took over right-wing politics does not happen without James Lindsay.
Mm-hmm.
That shit, like all Rufo's understanding of critical race theory is all James Lindsay. It just comes straight through it. There's tweets where you can go, you just search their interactions, and there's one of like, it's Marcuse, Lindsay's posting Marcuse, and then Rufo replies and goes, "Great post lately, James. Thanks for sharing this." And then
It's like that meme with the two Greek philosophers walking through the forum. Real high level ideas.
Yeah, no, exactly. Richard, yes, Dave Rubin, said in his book, which I will give him credit. I do believe that Dave Rubin actually wrote that book. I've read a lot of conservative books that I think were written by ghostwriters, but I totally believe that Rubin wrote that. And in that book, right, he's got that whole extended metaphor about like ideas is getting drunk. You know, he's going to go to the bar and drink ideas all night, get hammered on ideas. So yeah, I mean, I think that's right. But I mean, like James Lindsay doesn't have any of that. I mean, he just sounds like a guy you met, like, you know, waiting for the bus, like talking to you.
He's a suit.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I guess the interesting thing to me about James lately, you know, besides the fact that he is he's trying to get he's off like in that clip we watched earlier, trying to get the New Hampshire state legislature to ban critical race theory in the classroom. And of course, when he does this, he's not doing that by like he's not like, these bills don't say like, here are the list of people that you can't mention in the classroom: Kimberly Crenshaw, Derek Bell, he's not going to do that, right? Because it's extraordinarily unlikely that any of those people are ever actually going. I mean, that would be an awesome high school where like
seriously,
you actually mention any of those people in high school class, right? So what they say is like, well, you can't use divisive concepts, and there'll be these incredibly vague descriptions of what counts as a divisive concept, and they'll and some of them, we looked at a few earlier, some of them will be like, you can't say really racist things in the classroom, but like some of them will be like, you can't say that people should feel guilty, about the things their race has done, or you can't say, that America or the state of New Hampshire is racist, which is very specific, but that people are out there saying the state of New Hampshire is a racist state. It's not okay. We can't stand for that. But like what really strikes me about this is, if this is actually in place, like imagine actually being like a high school, I don't know, social studies teacher, and that this is in place. That if you're reported for teaching critical race theory, you could, lose your job theoretically.
People
right?
already have, yeah.
And so like there's going to be this constant voice in the back of your head, right? It's like, oh, wait a second. Is that on the divisive concepts list? Is it close enough to something that's on the divisive concepts list that, that I could get like accused, for saying it, and you're going to end up doing this weird, like, you'll be doing the things that people do when they're like, teaching the equivalent class in like an authoritarian regime where it's like, okay, I don't want to get in trouble, like even we don't have to go as dramatic as like, I'm going to be sent to a gulag or something, but like, like I'm going to get in trouble.
There
right?
was like the ad absurdum moment when in Texas recently, the school board somewhere under the same sort of campaign of like trying to eliminate divisiveness and trying to open up inquiry or whatever, the school board told the teachers that they had to teach both sides of an issue. So this one teacher goes to, I think it was their supervisor, and it was recorded. It was like, does that mean we have to teach both sides of the Holocaust? Like, swear to God. And the administrator's like, I guess so. Gotta teach both sides of the Holocaust. But
the crazy part was, she brought it up. She was like, so, you got to teach both sides. So if you have a book on the Holocaust, like, she brought the example in.
Oh my God. So it's just assigning David Irving next to like a normal history book.
Another teacher goes, what is the other side of how do you teach the other side of the Holocaust? And the administrator goes, believe me, that's come up.
You cannot make this shit up, man. It's incredible. I mean, you're talking, Ben, about like the real consequences of this this culture war and this campaign that's going on right now. I mean, let's look at the other side of it. So the flip side of it, I think, and this is important because we can't let liberals off the hook here. The other side of it is that there has been a push. What's the woman's name? D'Angelo.
Mm-hmm.
Robin D'Angelo. The idea of like diversity. What is it? DIEE, diversity, inclusivity,
DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion.
Yeah, and then also basically all these ideas that are out there now. There have been attempts at like Blue State and other school districts in order to do something in light of the insurrection that happened last year. What couldn't happen in our society, you can argue about why and why not. What couldn't happen was to either defund, abolish, or reform the police, which is what people were on the fucking street for. And those were material policies. These are things like that actually would take politicians passing laws in order to fix, or at least to mitigate, the things that so many tens of millions of people were upset about. That was impossible. So then through a sort of combination counterinsurgency campaign by giant corporations and by members of the Democratic Party, what was given to those tens of millions of pissed off people instead was representation. It was given like like better, like more D'Angelo in the classrooms. You know, it was an attempt to try to make like representative and like ephemeral something that was very, very real. So when the Rufos and the Lindsays are talking about changes that are happening in the curriculum, it's not scary communists who are trying to overthrow Western conceptions. It's not people bringing divisiveness into there because they're part of the World Economic Forum / President Xi nexus. It's like liberals who are pulling the only lever that liberals really have, which is to try to like do some like fluffy sort of I don't know, like representative politics in the spheres of school and in the spheres of corporate America. And so they're calling out something real, but it's not the communists that's doing it. It's those same liberals that refuse to do anything about the police murders and mass incarceration, who are now using all these sort of like, you know, bullshit, fluffy rhetorical devices in order to try to fix society.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I actually wrote an article basically saying that last summer in our digital media. It's called Overdosing on Symbolism. And like one of the things that got me thinking about it is, I think I leave him anonymous in the article. I think I could just say David Griscom at this point, but I you know, when I wanted to vague it up, I always said like a friend of mine who lives in Brooklyn and is a podcaster, because that only narrows it down to like 20,000 people, right? You know, but he sent me these screenshots from the Facebook group of his like neighborhood beer bar, where people were like besieging it with like demand, like they were super angry and bombarding it with like, you know, why haven't you put out a statement of support for Black Lives Matter? And it's like, well, they hadn't put out any kind of statement. They hadn't really used, like, since they shut down for the pandemic, they hadn't really used their social media feeds, you know, and they were like barely in operation at that point, you know, but
everybody was forced to take a side, like in their own brains psychologically, and be either anti-racist or racist, or they had to come and say like, well, I don't know, something. Yeah. Anyway, something kind of like meaningless in support, even if like a bar supporting Black Lives Matter. What does that mean?
Right, exactly. Like, and so how is the bar supporting Black Lives Matter going to lead to, I don't know, like defunding or like, I don't, you know, anything that you could count as actual substantive progress on anything that was like related to the direct issues that originally caused the protests, right? So it's like, you know, banning chokeholds or, you know, have like any of that, right? Banning surplus military gold being sold to, you know, local police departments. It obviously wasn't, right? Like, and I remember around the same time, right, my mom has gotten really into birding since she retired, and she told me that there was like a move to rename some obscure kind of warbler that is like named after a Confederate. It's like, okay, I guess, right? But it's like the fact that you're sort of digging that deep to try to find something, right? You know, let's see if we can like yell at the local beer bar to get them to put out a meaningless statement of support. Let's try and change this. I think really indicates what you're talking about, which is that if you can't do anything about the thing that you're actually mad about, like if you can't, like, if you sort of understand at some level that like doing anything about how policing works in America is an incredibly heavy political lift, and you don't really believe you're going to be able to do it, but man, like, you know, changing the name of a bird, getting a street sign changed, getting somebody fired, getting the beer bar to, you know, put out a statement. All of these things are super duper easy because they don't actually threaten anybody's interest, right? I mean, like
they don't threaten any interest, and it's a terrain that the same Democrats and liberals who paid lip service to like, oh, we support the BLM movement in the streets, you know, blah, blah, blah. It's a terrain that they love. It's a very familiar terrain. It's the terrain of Nancy Pelosi on one knee with Chuck Schumer wearing a fucking kente cloth. That's where these motherfuckers... I keep forgetting
that that's a thing that really happened.
It really happened. And this is all that they want to give anyways. But what happens then is that because it's a terrain that these like liberal people in power want, and it's a terrain that Christopher Rufo and James Lindsay want to argue on, then this becomes this sort of self-reinforcing things. And so you have the you know, people on the left saying, well, we have to defend CRT in elementary schools, and you have the people on the right being like, this is the destruction of Western civilization. And what got left completely behind in that was any discussion of, say, mass incarceration or militarization of the police.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that, like, just before we throw back to Sam, I mean, like, just to connect the dots here real quick, like, I think that, it's particularly the flip side of, how people end up with these conspiracy theories, which is about, globalists or whoever, that, like, well, you don't have a structural analysis of anything, that but you have a sense that there's some group that has interests opposed to yours that's in control, that's where you end up going. But I think it is the flip side, because if you don't actually have an analysis of what could be done to improve the material conditions of people who are living in poor neighborhoods, subject to militarized policing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all of which goes with poverty, in America. But like and of course, due to the apartheid history of America, that's going to be disproportionately racialized. But if you can't think of you can't sort of imagine your way to doing something about that, then say, okay, well, what can we do something about? And this is actually to go right back to where we started. This is why this is why it's actually kind of an important point that Marx and Hegel have different theories of history, right? That like then you can think, okay, what can I imagine doing something about the ideas in people's heads, right? Maybe we can change those, and then so you end up having this incredibly dismal politics where it's all about bringing in Robin DiAngelo to like yell at people at some meeting they have to go to because their boss made them do it while they're at work, and like lead them on a vision quest about their internalized whiteness that's not actually going to help anybody in any way, and is going to be so alienated to so many people that it gives all the ammunition in the world to the Lindsays and Rufos of the world, who in turn, could use it to gain support for things that actually do matter, because they're
real policies.
Yeah, exactly. They're imposing these like censorious, regimes on teachers. But I do want to go back to you, Sam, and also got to wrap up in a couple of minutes. But I cut you off earlier, right? Because I think you were starting to say something really important about how part of what's going on here, like if you look at how James Lindsay went quite as insane as he did, is audience capture. That like as your audience radicalizes one direction or another, right? There are all these obvious economic incentives to find some way. And this is not to say that he's being insincere. I actually think that James Lindsay is tragically sincere.
Yeah,
I do too. I agree.
Yeah.
But that you do have these incentives, which most people, given a powerful enough incentive to think something, will find some way of convincing themselves that it's true, even if they have to spend 16 hours a day. Kimberly Crenshaw. But Sam,
so there's so many things I wanted to say in response to some of these things. Wait, wrapping up. How long do we have?
Let's give it 5 minutes.
Okay, cool. So one of the things I was thinking about, I really liked the what was the title of that essay? Overdosing on Symbolism. Yeah, I'm excited to read that. I was recently talking about the word decolonize, and how people use that word to be like decolonize your syllabus, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's like someone asked on Twitter, why do people feel this need to be hyper radical in their speech with what you're doing to your syllabus? Like why do we need to use the word decolonize for that? And my thought was the prospects for actual material change are so dim that people just feel some kind of weird pleasure, or they feel satiated by being able to be radical in their speech.
Yeah, although I have to say, just to slip something in here, I always imagine some philosophy professor who has a heart attack is in the afterlife, and they meet somebody who died in the Algerian national liberation struggle, and that person says, it's like, oh, what were you doing? Oh, I was engaged in decolonize. It's like, oh, me too.
Yeah.
And Fanon somewhere just going like this.
Yeah.
Fanon's
listening to Marvin's Room. There's this little passage here that's just of this history book. The Citizens Council Organized Resistance to the Second Reconstruction, 1954 to 64, by historian Neil McMillan, and I posted some of this today because I was just so struck by the like parallels in the white parent freak out school board thing. So we have already experiencing a difficult period of transition wrought by an economic revolution, a major war, and sweeping New Deal reforms. Much of the South was ill prepared for the tremors loosed upon it by the quickening pace of civil rights. The economic dynamism that had transformed rural America into an industrialized and urbanized world power came late to the South, but it did come, and it came with astonishing rapidity. In its wake followed not only greater economic balance and diversity, but a threatening array of socioeconomic changes which altered time-honored Dixie values and further diluted Southern homogeneity. Then came Brown v. Board of Education, with all of the domestic upheavals implicit in that decision, and many confused, resentful, and ultimately defiant Southerners began to look about for substantive explanations for the kaleidoscope of internal strains and divisive elements cracking the very substratum of traditional Southern society. Vexed by labor unrest or troubled by rising Negro expectations, the conservative Southerner was not predisposed to view regional social change as an irresistible phase of democratic development. Unable and unwilling to objectify the sources of his anxieties, he learned to speak in vague terms of conspiracy. Just as an earlier generation of conservatives had seen a frightful red specter lurking behind labor unrest, the New Deal's coddling of the Negro, and such wartime innovations as the FEPC, the disquieted Southerner of the post-Brown period, regarded the Negro Revolution as a product of the communist conspiracy.
Yep. That's why I said this is the dumbest Red Scare, because there aren't even any fucking communists out there.
No, exactly. Like at least the one that Sam is reading the quote about happened because of, you know, stuff like the New Deal, the beginnings of some sort of proto-civil rights legislation from the executive branch from FDR, you know, like all of these things that actually like made like a meaningful, you know, like the rise of the labor movement, you know, like, and it's like, man, that's so sad that we get the backlash, but we don't even get any of that stuff.
We didn't fucking get anything. We got nothing. We got fucking Nancy Pelosi in a kente cloth. And now we have to deal with this stupid backlash for the next how many fucking years? I don't know. I guess until Trump's back in office.
All right. Well, that is the perfect. I think that's got to be the perfect closing line. I don't think any of us are going to improve on that. Thank you so much, guys. This is a lot of fun.
I had a great time. Thanks.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Thank you.
Good to meet you, Sam.
Yeah, good to meet you too.
All right. So you can follow Sam is at Dion Teleologist at Twitter, and you can watch and you can follow Sean, who's as_a_worker on Twitter, and listen to him on the Antifada. As far as this show goes, we are about to go to the philosophy segment with Jennifer Burgis. But first, I'm going to do a quick preview of the episode that was the last episode that was posted on the Patreon. Normally, we try to do a Patreon episode every Saturday. In this case, you know, we took last week off, you know, obviously because of Thanksgiving. I was there not trying to radicalize, you know, my in-laws. But before that, I had a really good conversation with Mike Kim, who's somebody I met when I was in New York last time. He was at that Gotham Atheist thing, and he is he's an academic. He's in grad school. He is also a veteran. Somebody, you know, who's been in Iraq, and he knows a lot about the veteran healthcare system, and you know, he's literally a warrior monk because he was actually literally a Catholic monk at a point before that, and he had a lot to say, in particular over the course of the interview, about Dan Crenshaw and the things that Dan Crenshaw says about healthcare and the veteran health system. So I was really excited to record that episode. Everybody should check it out. I think we have a little clip from very near the beginning. I'm going to play that, and then we're going to be back on with Professor Jennifer Burgis.
Some people call themselves warrior monks, you know, like David Goggins and, you know, Navy SEAL and General Mattis and everything. But in reality, and not to minimize their lives, but I was a monk. I was a Catholic friar monk
So is there like an order you were part of?
Yes.
Or okay.
Yes, I was part of the Dominican order.
Okay.
And not the Jesuits. We educate the Jesuits. Yeah. So I was a Dominican friar for I was in the program for 10 years. I was in Ballast for 4 and 6 years. You know, I it took a while. I fell in love and did my psychoanalytic program. I'm a psychoanalyst as well. I've been in the military, in and out of the military, all honorable discharges and transitions, just to let you know, going back from 1986 to 2009. But
right.
You know, that was a lot of, you know, reserve and active duty time. But I think it's really interesting because I wasn't like the traditional career military person like my sister, who was career military, and she was only in the Army, for her, many years in service. So I was able to kind of like understand military culture from different standpoints, from the Cold War, the war on drugs, as Noam Chomsky calls it, that military humanism or humanitarianism that was going on in the 90s, that type of military, and then the military of the war on terror military.
Yep, that was Mike Kim. This is Professor Jennifer Burgis.
My triumphant return.
Yes, she was sick for a while, but she is all better now.
Woo!
And is ready to do our philosophy segment. I should say, by the way, when I was kind of poking some gentle fun at the phrase decolonize as applied to syllabi, there was that's the correct reaction. There was somebody in the chat who said, okay, but philosophy is...
I have not decolonized my syllabi.
Oh, no, you haven't?
Am I about to get fired?
Oh, yeah, you're supposed to do that.
Well, Rick should speak up then.
Yeah.
Or Ryan Lake, one of the two.
Yeah, no, Ryan's supposed to be her mentor
exactly.
at Georgia State. So
exactly.
I don't know why he hasn't, instructed her in decolonizing syllabus. The point isn't that just doing abstract philosophy doesn't have value. I obviously think it has value.
Does it? Well, that's a topic for another day.
There we go. But I do think I just think that you need to be clear on the difference, right? That it's like
being clear on all differences is just good in general.
Yes, it's always good to be clear on differences, and like decolonizing to me means like, you're fighting a war to kick out the colonizers, not like you're doing your syllabus differently. Those seem pretty importantly different to me. But
I will kick the colonizers out of my syllabus.
Yes. On that, you have a lot of colonizers in your syllabus?
I don't know. I need to see.
Yeah, I've done your decolonization process, so,
exactly.
So how will you know? I will say, by the way, this is not the main thing we were going to talk about for this philosophy segment, but on the subject of abstract philosophy, I thought this was kind of funny. This is a letter from Rabbi Joseph Soufli from this Portuguese synagogue in Amsterdam where Spinoza was before he was kicked out and excommunicated for heresy.
Spinoza.
So this is from yesterday. And it's a response to this professor who's, I guess, doing a documentary who wanted to film in the synagogue. Says, to the attention of Professor Yitzhak Malmed, I am going to butcher the pronunciation, but basically rabbinic authorities excommunicated Spinoza and his writings with the severest possible ban, a ban that remains in force for all time and cannot be rescinded.
Okay.
You have devoted your life to the study of Spinoza's banned works and the development of his ideas. Your request to visit our complex and create a film about this Epicurus, the heretic, in our yeshiva is incompatible with our centuries-old halakhic, historic, and ethical tradition and an unacceptable assault on our identity and heritage. I therefore deny your request and declare you persona non grata in the Portuguese synagogue complex. I wish you a meaningful Hanukkah, Rabbi Joseph Soufli. And I love that sign-off, right? Like there seems to be something that's like almost high school Mean Girl-ish about the combination of a letter that like stops this far short of like describing in detail the specific ways that demons will torture him in the afterlife for having dared to study Spinoza, and then ends with it, but have a meaningful Hanukkah. Yeah.
If you were studying Spinoza right now, I would feel like you were being tortured right now. That's how I would feel about it. But
yeah.
Wait, Ben is connecting to women? What?
I don't know.
What women are these?
I don't know what this is a reference to in particular, but yeah.
We should talk after the show.
I don't think she was accusing me of that, but
maybe we can get Miss Siren on Zoom with us. Apparently, there are things I need to know.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Exactly. But hey, happy Hanukkah.
Exactly.
You know, it's like just saying the most devastating put down ever. Then like, bye now. Have a good day. Yeah, exactly. So there we go. Sam in the private chat apparently is doing a better job of decolonizing his syllabus.
Good for him.
Good for him.
If you have any tips,
I know, right?
I'd like to keep my job.
Yeah.
Oh, we're in Georgia. They don't care.
Yeah, no, they don't. Probably get fired for decolonizing your syllabus here. But enough Spinoza.
Good.
Yeah. No, we're not going to talk about
any Spinoza is enough.
We're not going to talk about Spinoza today. We're going to talk about a much more important and brilliant philosopher, Ayn Rand.
Wait, what?
So, in a past segment, we watched.
We destroyed her.
That's good. That's good. Do that again.
And we're gonna destroy her again.
Yeah.
That's what we do here.
Yeah. So one more time.
Destroy. Like I destroyed that 7-Eleven ice cream.
Okay.
I actually did. It was very disgusting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay then. You never actually had the ice cream at 7-Eleven.
I did. I tried it.
Well,
we got the chocolate ice cream.
Not on that occasion, but yeah.
No, we did. Oh no, that was a different occasion.
That was a different occasion.
At okay, so he took me back to the 7-Eleven at a later time. And I did get the chocolate ice cream, and it was really disgusting.
So Ayn Rand is, we saw in a previous segment her opinions about Kant.
We did.
Ayn Rand was way ahead of her time in blaming Kant for all the problems of the world. There is a article about that we was briefly thinking about doing tonight, but there's like too much wrong with it. It would take like 2 hours. We'll do, maybe there'll be an episode about that article. It was from Discourse magazine, and it was about how Kant is the source of wokeness and postmodernism and God knows what else. But anyway,
Jay Hutch wants us to do a segment on all our 7-Eleven. We'll get back to you.
So we saw Ayn's thoughts about Kant, but she also has some thoughts about utilitarianism. So here's the Ayn Rand quote about utilitarianism. The greatest good for the greatest number, I'm not going to try to do Ayn Rand's accent.
Thank you.
Is one of the most vicious slogans ever foisted on humanity. The slogan has no concrete specific meaning. There is no way to interpret it benevolently. That's weird that it has no specific meaning, but you also can't interpret it benevolently. But whatever. But a great many.
Well, I think all the ways of interpreting it are
benevolent. There we go.
Yeah.
But a great many ways in which it can be used to justify the most vicious actions. What is the definition of the good in this slogan? None, except what is good for the greatest number, which in any particular issue decides what is good for what in any particular issue decides who in any particular
issue decides what is good for the greatest number. Why the greatest number? Take it back over.
No, I was enjoying your Ayn Rand. If you consider this moral, you would have to approve of the following examples. So she's about to give us some things that you have to approve of if you're a utilitarian, which are exact exact applications of the slogan. Now, I'm not sure how the slogan could be hopelessly vague, but also have exact applications, but maybe all of the interpretations have these exact applications. And exact applications of the slogan in practice.
Ooh, the Nazis. Nazi warning.
51% of humanity enslaving the other 49. 9 hungry cannibals eating the 10th one. A lynch mob murdering a man who they consider dangerous to the community. All of those are things that utilitarians love. There were 70 million Germans in Germany and 600,000 Jews. The greatest number, the Germans, supported the Nazi government, which told them that their greatest good would be served by exterminating the smaller number, the Jews, and grabbing their property. This was the horror achieved in practice by a vicious slogan accepted in theory. All right, so now it's not just that the utilitarians would have to approve of it, it's that the Nazis did it because they were utilitarians.
Y'all better listen to Silver. I'm just saying. Okay, go ahead.
Yes. Silver Harlow says that I will remind people that Professor Jennifer Burgis' ban on Kant puns remains in effect. So you can't say any of those. So
maybe you should be taking other women to 7-Eleven.
The greatest. But one might say the majority of these examples did not achieve any real good for itself either. No, it didn't, because the good is not determined by counting numbers. It is not achieved by the sacrifice of anyone to anyone. So, Jen.
Yes. Hi, Jay Andrew. Yes.
Does Ayn Rand correctly understand what utilitarians are saying?
No.
Okay.
Any sentence that starts out, does she understand, can immediately be answered by no.
Yeah. Well, she was right that A is A. I'll give her that. But
oh, yeah, that's true.
A is indeed A. Not actually very controversial, I think you'll find. But
isn't it though? Isn't that what you wrote your dissertation about?
It's not.
I mean, if there's no question, then how could you have developed a whole career on the basis of A equals A?
Well, the dissertation was about solving the liar paradox without accepting either dialetheism or paracompleteness.
Yeah. So A and not A can never be the same, basically. Is what he's saying.
All right. Yeah. Close enough.
Y'all have missed me, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, Discourse Magazine does sound a little bit like something from The Simpsons. But I read it in Discourse Magazine. But in any case, so that phrase, the greatest good for the greatest number, where does that come from?
Jeremy Bentham.
I'm not.
Key of the Mummified Head.
Yes. Yep.
Oh, wow, you have the picture.
Yep.
I didn't even know you had the picture.
That's
awesome.
That is Jeremy Bentham's head, which is preserved at the London School of Economics. Fun fact.
Yes.
He had his head mummified. Left note to the LLC. Not entirely sure why, but
there's a whole story there.
Okay.
But we can talk about it later.
Okay. All right. That'll be some scintillating conversation afterwards.
My students seem to enjoy it.
I believe that he may have looked better in life than he does now. Oh, what the hell? Why did he do that?
He wanted to. He wanted to have his body preserved, and so they preserved it. They stuffed it they mummified it, stuffed it up with some hay, and put his clothes on there. And the head, as you saw, didn't turn out that well after a while. So they took it off and they put the head down between his feet, and they made a model of his head that they then put on the him and put some of his hair on it, to maintain realism. And students kept stealing the mummified head for pranks. So it is no longer sitting between his feet. They had to lock it away so that students would no longer have access to the mummified head. And sometimes Bentham attends meetings of the college where he is listed as present but not voting.
Fair enough. So again, why did he want to do all this?
Well, I don't know why, but
Okay.
it was done because he wanted it.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah. So if you want to be mummified and your whatever auto icon was what they called it in those days, you'll have to decide what school you want it to be displayed at.
We could just put it at we can just put my mummified head among all the other like knickknacks at your parents' house.
Right? It would. Who would even notice it? Who would even notice it? Oh man!
Like, you'd be sitting there for, oh, is that Ben's head? It's like, oh yeah, that is old Ben.
That is old Ben.
Oh, University College London. So I don't know why I remember that as anyway. Regardless, so wrong London College apparently, but
who can remember all the details?
Everything else is right. Okay, so Jeremy Bentham was talking about this. So first question, when Jeremy Bentham talks about the greatest good for the greatest number, does he mean just taking a poll and seeing what everybody thinks is good?
No.
That's not what he means?
No. I have never seen the word poll mentioned in Bentham's writings.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Bentham and John Stuart Mill, who is Bentham's godson, and wrote this book, Utilitarianism, which is kind of the classic statement of utilitarian moral philosophy. Fun fact, not quite as fun as Jeremy Bentham's head. That's a high bar.
What is?
But fun fact, right? Mill was Bentham's godson, and Mill's godson was Bertrand Russell.
I knew you were going to get that in there somewhere.
So, nice little historically significant chain of atheist godfathers there. But in any case, so if he doesn't just mean whatever you think is good, that if 51% of people think that slowly torturing the other 49% to death is good, that Bentham and Mill are not actually counting this as good.
I would think not, no.
What do they think is good?
Pleasure, happiness, things like that.
Yeah.
Good things? They think good things are good?
Yeah, good things are good and bad things are bad. That's,
Much like A and A. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So none of those things that were just listed would actually be justified by utilitarianism. Bentham really seems to just mean like pleasure. Mill's got a little bit more of a nuanced account of what happiness means. He's tried not to be quite crude about it. That like you sort of add up all the moments of pleasure.
Yeah.
And that's that, right? Like he makes a distinction between higher and lower pleasures. And he says that, the sort of idea of happiness as a goal of life isn't a continuous state of excitement, but
why not?
I mean, I guess if you can get that, then,
on my PowerPoint slide that says that, I have Snoopy doing the Snoopy dance.
Right.
This is how we should live at every moment. Snoopy dance.
Yeah. And Mill argues that treating people justly, we sort of know from the experience of history over the long term, will lead to greater happiness, understood as the sort of happy life where, you have many good things and not very many bad things. And, the bad things aren't too bad and etc. So that's Mill's argument. Now, it's worth saying, there are about 10,000 better objections to utilitarianism than anything that Ayn Rand said there. You can watch us do, when we were doing the separate Philosophy Friday streams before we moved it to Monday nights as a segment of the main show. You can watch us do one where we talk about a bunch of them. So classics include the trolley problem. Which is not quite like, you're killing, 4 people to make 6 people happy, which would not actually, even according to Bentham, balance out. But it's about, choosing, okay, if you're going to kill, 1 person, you could save 5 people's lives, then do that. Another is Nozick, who is like Ayn Rand, a libertarian. I know that Ayn Rand cultists don't like to be referred to as libertarians because they have some finicky objection to the word, but I don't really care. Let's just say libertarian. So Rand and Nozick are both libertarians, but Nozick is like a vastly smarter libertarian, and he actually does have some good objections to utilitarianism, at least classical utilitarianism. Classical utilitarians believe that the good is just happiness, that you're having happy experiences. There are other libertarians who instead want to talk about like desire satisfaction or other things. But Nozick does have a pretty good objection to that. You can see us talk about. What's just as a reminder for people, what's the do we have an elevator pitch version of Nozick's objection?
But no, I don't. Was I supposed to come with one?
Look, you were supposed to you had two jobs. You're supposed to decolonize your syllabus.
I failed at everything.
And you're supposed to come up with a pithy explanation of Nozick's experience machine argument. So you can.
Was this when the cat was sleeping on me, so I fell asleep?
Yeah, you couldn't get up because Shabazz was asleep on you.
It was very, so he was like up on my chest, and I was having to support him with my arm. What could I do but fall asleep with him, really?
Yeah, fair enough. Now, if you could live a life where you were in an artificial reality where Shabazz was asleep on you.
Oh, yeah, that whole business. Yeah, that whole business.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
There we go.
So,
there we go.
Neo waking up from the Matrix, which is Nozick's point, is basically that when you think about the Matrix, if they made the Matrix really nice, Nozick thinks most of us would still not want to be plugged in there because we don't only value happiness, we also value
other stuff.
Other stuff. We value lots of other stuff. In this particular case, we value connection to objective reality, having true beliefs, stuff like that. But we also value, individual autonomy and et cetera, et cetera. Lots and lots of good objections to utilitarianism. Certainly better than Ayn Rand is offering. But
you can read my dissertation. It's out there.
Oh, yeah. Fair enough.
It's out there in the world.
Yeah, there was a question about whether there's a Dr. Jen book you could read. So yeah, her dissertation is indeed available online.
It's not going to do me any good for you to read it, but if you're interested, it's out there.
It's about an alternative moral framework, social contract theory. So,
there are definitely tacos in the dream tank. Come on, y'all. And yes, please do buy Ben's book.
Yes, if you buy Ben's books, you support both of us. So, and also the aforementioned cat.
Yes,
and,
he needs a lot.
Yeah, he has many needs. So it keeps him in cat food and litter.
Kitty litter is expensive.
It is. So to sum up,
what were we summing up? What were we talking about? This seems to have gone in so many different directions.
She might not be entirely better.
Oh!
So we were talking about Ayn Rand's objection to utilitarianism and how it's not very good and how there are many better objections to utilitarianism out there. Mm-hmm. So when you are confronted with the question, is Ayn Rand confused about X? For any value of X, how should you answer?
Yes.
All right. Well, Jen's not sick anymore.
I mean, I really thought this was going in a different direction than it went in, but happy.
What direction did you think was going to go?
Like in what way she's interpreting it incorrectly.
Yeah,
that's what I thought we were.
No, that is what we were. We got a little off track. Well, let's just. Well, you did say one of the ways she's interpreting it correctly, that she's misunderstanding what's good. That she thinks good is whatever people think is good.
Right.
Whereas according to utilitarians, you could absolutely be wrong about what's good.
Right.
You can think that I don't know, obedience to some religious text that tells you to live a life of self-abnegation is good, But, utilitarian might say, no, that's actually objectively bad because it doesn't promote, happiness. So according to utilitarianism, like, you can absolutely be mistaken about what's good. So that's one. The other way actually is worth spending just a minute on before we go to the post game with Nando. Which is, are utilitarians just counting heads?
No.
Well,
does Bentham's mummified head count as a head if we are just counting heads? Anyway, no, we're not counting heads. We're counting utiles.
What's a utile?
It's a unit of happiness, which of course those are easily measured and calculated units of happiness. So what you're going to do is, if action A gives me 5 units of happiness and action B gives Ben 4 units of happiness, you should obviously do action A, even though we're 1-to-1. So you would think it would be even, but 5 is greater than 4. So there you go. If what am I trying to say? If option A gives me 5 units of happiness and option B gives Ben 1 unit and gives some other J. Andrew another unit, that's not 2-to-1. You should still do action A because that's 5 units to 2 units. So we're not counting heads, we're counting utiles and trying to maximize the number of utiles. Yes, I am very serious. A unit of happiness, now, because this is a calculating business. So you have to have something to calculate in. So
yeah, I should say
some people call them hedons.
I like hedons, but yeah,
I like utiles.
I should say, to be fair, my impression is that most utilitarian moral philosophers don't actually think that we can like quantify the amount of happiness that people are experiencing. I'm pretty sure if we had Peter Singer on the show, he would say, no, I don't think we can do that.
Like, some things are obvious, if you take me to 7-Eleven and get me the chocolate ice cream there, and you take somebody else to get Bluebell chocolate ice cream, obviously they are going to get more pleasure than I am, even if you can't, like, specific.
I thought she meant let's stop for ice cream at the way home, and 7-Eleven was right there.
We were out on a date.
I thought that we were going home.
Oh, honey, go to 7-Eleven.
So,
I don't know if you're still counting.
Well,
I would say that in some cases it's just kind of obvious where the most pleasure is going to happen.
Yeah. So it's not that like utilitarian moral philosophers are so foolish that they think that human psychology is so simple that they can literally like say the exact number of units of happiness that somebody is experiencing.
Yeah, we're not going to pull out our abacus, but some
but
things
it's a useful, like I think even though probably most utilitarians, to be fair to them, do have a much more nuanced view of psychology, it's still like a useful model of the theory that like it helps you show you how it works. Like it helps like, and of course, obviously you're right that like it's not like it's a big mystery. It's like, I don't know what's going to make somebody happier, giving them a cone of ice cream or punching them in the face. Like, who knows? Like I think we do, even if we can't precisely quantify it, on your abacus that of course we all have, then you can still make some very reasonable judgments about it. And the utile thing, like I said, it's a simplification. They don't literally believe this is possible, but
although there are no utiles down the data at the 7-Eleven path, which is correct, and also correct that Bluebell provides lots and lots of utiles.
I thought it was over. I thought we were going home. But
all right, we're married. This date does not have to be very long.
So yeah, the like it's a useful simplification, and it helps show you why it is not in fact the case that
it is not.
If 51 people want to enslave 49 people, that like it's not quite that easy to knock down utilitarianism, that they like, they're good objections you could make. Like, well, what if over the long term, John Stuart Mill is just wrong in his predictions about what's going to lead to the most happiness? Would it then still be, wrong to do these things? Like, those are the sorts of things that you could turn into good objections. But like,
well, then you have different kinds of utilitarianism. You have expected utiles and then actual utiles.
Yeah, exactly.
Which sort of utiles are the ones that count?
You really like saying utiles.
I love saying utiles.
So like, yeah, because being enslaved tends to make somebody really, 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 really unhappy. Like,
yes.
And think about the worst day you've ever had, right? Then multiply it,
when
by
my husband took me on a date to 7-Eleven.
Being enslaved would be worse than that.
Yes.
Like,
I will agree with that.
Like, if you ask people, like, hey, if you play a coin flipping game and if it comes up heads, you get you get $10,000. If it comes up tails, you'd be a slave. I think most people who are not insane would decline to play that game, right? Like,
no matter how much the payoff was.
Exactly.
No one would accept that game.
Exactly. So yes, the decrease of happiness among the 49% would greatly outweigh the increase among the 51%. So Ayn Rand is wrong. Not the first time, not the last time, but this is another thing that she's wrong about. Any last thoughts before we go to the post game?
Just the usual. Team Snoopy forever.
Sorry, let's do that again. Post game, we're going to be talking to Nando Vila from Woke Bros and the Weekend Show on Jacobin, the co-host of the Outcastarian. We're going to talk a little bit about Honduras. We're going to be talking about some new data about what working class voters respond to. It's always fun hanging out with Nando. Join the Patreon. Patrons should already have the link to the post game. I forgot to say all that. Now that we've done that,
Team Snoopy forever.
Left is best.